Hi, this is a special message for those of you who don't skip over the musical intros to my videos. I really appreciate the fact that you would listen to these things, and it really means a lot to me. And you're the viewers I actually care about. The people who skip over the intros, they're nothing to me. So thank you very much for listening to the musical intros.
He caught me in the bathroom with a pair of pantyhose.
Alright, hello there, thrill seekers. That was a little snippet of a song called Erake My Eye by Cheech and Chong. If you know, you know. And today on the video channel, I want to do a book review. And the book in question is by Roland Vernon, and it's called Star in the East, Krishnamurti, The Invention of a Messiah. And I got this book in England as a gift from a friend of mine who actually hadn't read the book, but I think he was just trying to get rid of some books. And I found it very fascinating. It is a biography of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jiddu Krishnamurti is, I'm going to give you my short and personalized version of his story, but you can find it everywhere on the internet, so don't worry. If you want more info, there's lots to be found. I believe the first Krishnamurti book I ever read was this one, You Are the World. I might have read this in high school. I'm not even sure. But I definitely had read a bunch of Krishnamurti books by the time I got to be a student at Kent State University. One of the reasons is because by then I discovered Zen Buddhism, and I had a teacher of Zen Buddhism named Tim, and Tim, in sort of off-the-cuff fashion, one day said he thought that Jiddu Krishnamurti was one of the most enlightened people alive today, because he was alive at the time, and I thought, oh boy. And so I went, there was a place called Shelley's Book Bar, which was around the corner from where Tim and I lived, and it was a used bookstore. And did I say that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. They always seem to have Krishnamurti books there for like $2 or $3. So I bought a bunch of them. I remember really enjoying commentaries on living, and I just read a bunch of Krishnamurti books, and I really liked them. And in preparation for this video, because I haven't read much Krishnamurti since then, but in preparation for this video, last night, or maybe night before last, I read a chapter of this book, which I happen to still have around, called The Awakening of Intelligence, and I thought, wow, yeah, that stuff still is good. It still holds up as far as I'm concerned. He's an interesting fellow. His story is that in the 19th century, in the 1800s, there was a group who still exists today called this Theosophical Society. And the Theosophical Society was founded by this rather eccentric Russian woman named Madame Blavatsky. I don't even think her real name was Blavatsky, but everybody called her Madame Blavatsky. And her compatriot, her partner in crime, as they say, the kids say today, was a guy named C.W. Leadbeater. And yes, it is pronounced Leadbeater. I had for years thought it was pronounced Leadbetter, but also in preparation for this video, I went and looked at some old films that are on YouTube of Krishnamurti and his people, and they pronounce his name Leadbeater. Anyway, these two people were very deeply interested in Hinduism and Buddhism, which were just starting to be translated into European languages then. I think the first translations came out in the 1700s, and so by the mid-1800s when they got started, there were not that many good translations, but there were a few. And they both also went to India to talk to actual living masters of the philosophies they were interested in studying. And they mixed this all up with what was very faddish at the time, which was, I think it's often called spiritualism or occultism. It was an interest in, trans-channeling, out-of-body experiences, talking to the dead, talking to these masters, they called them. This was their big thing, was that they said they were in contact with a bunch of masters who lived on another plane of reality, a supposedly higher plane of reality, and were giving them messages about the coming of Maitreya. And Maitreya is something they probably picked up from their readings of early Buddhism. In early Buddhism, there are stories supposedly attributed to the Buddha. Well, they're not supposedly, they are attributed to the Buddha. I'm just saying supposedly because who knows if the Buddha really did say this. But in the stories, he predicts that another Buddha will come in the future, and his name will be Maitreya. And over the years, a lot of people have claimed to be Maitreya. The two that spring to mind right away are Nichiren, who is the founder of the Nichiren sect of Buddhism, the guys who now say Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, of which Tina Turner was one of them. Nichiren claimed to be Maitreya back in the 1200s. He was a contemporary of Dogen. There's no evidence that they ever met, but they were contemporaries, and they lived in generally the same part of Japan. But as you know, communications in those days were limited, so they probably never encountered each other. But they could have. Anyway, so he claimed to be Maitreya, and then a person in contemporary times who claims to be Maitreya, and I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, but I kind of don't care, is I think he's called Dorje Chang Buddha III is what he calls himself, and I believe he's Taiwanese. He publishes a lot of books, which I've seen here and there. He gives them to Buddhist centers, these very lavish picture books with tons of pictures of himself in gold attire and crowns and scepters and all kinds of crazy stuff. So that's just two, but there've probably been dozens, if not hundreds, of Maitreya wannabes over the years. The problem with the Maitreya wannabes is that if you actually look at the text in which Buddha supposedly predicts the coming of Maitreya, he predicts Maitreya to appear like something like 10,000 or 100,000, I can't remember, some huge amount of time after him, when human beings have shrunk to being 3 feet, aka 1 meter tall, and all kinds of weird stuff I can't remember, but certainly not the 1200s or the 1800s or the early 20th century or any of that. But anyway, so Blavatsky and Leadbeater decided they needed to find a vehicle for the coming Maitreya, who these masters had told them was imminently on his way to make his comeback to Earth. Maybe he decided he needed to get there sooner than the Buddha had predicted. I don't know. So they found this kid on the beach. Leadbeater noticed this kid on the beach. They were in India at the time because the Theosophical Society had some kind of a center or something in India. And Leadbeater saw this kid, said he had this tremendous aura. The kid's father was involved in theosophy, and they made some kind of arrangements to take the kid away and raise him up to be this world teacher that they called, or actually the vehicle for the world teacher. So the world teacher was somehow supposed to take over Krishnamurti's body and use it as a vehicle for his teachings. Unfortunately for these folks, Krishnamurti ended up rebelling against this, and in 1929 he formally dissolved this organization that had been built up around him called the Order of the Star in the East. And this was a huge deal. It's always a surprising part of the story to me how big this was. In the 1920s, there were hundreds of thousands of members, and they were all waiting for this new Messiah. I mean, that was sort of in the air at the time, and it's kind of the reason people like Hitler were able to emerge, because this idea that this great leader was about to come was very big among a lot of people in those days, and they had hoped Krishnamurti was going to be it, but he didn't want to be it, and he spent the rest of his life. So he died in 1986, I believe, and you figure out how many decades that was, a bunch of decades, going around and speaking, and a lot of what he spoke was turned into books like this that I ended up reading and enjoying. And I think he was a very interesting fellow. So this book is a biography of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and I had read a biography of Jiddu Krishnamurti before, and this has got to be more than 20 years ago, maybe 30 years, maybe more than 30 years ago. I don't remember. It was a 2-volume thing called The Years of Awakening and the Years of Fulfillment, and it was by a woman named Mary Lutyens, who had been, or was at the time that she wrote it, because Krishnamurti was still alive then. She was a close friend of Krishnamurti and an insider, and so she had all sorts of inside information, and a lot of the book is told from her perspective of her actual memories of her dealings with Krishnamurti. But it also suffers from the fact that Krishnamurti was still alive at the time, that she was a very good friend of his, and didn't want to really say anything negative about him. So I don't remember what the book was like, except that I do remember it seemed a little bit... it wasn't exactly like lauding him to the skies, but it was sort of not, it seemed like there must be more to the story. Well, for more to the story, this is the book to go to. This author, who I'd never heard of before, called Roland Vernon, decided to try to write a very objective book about Krishnamurti, because in the time after Krishnamurti's death, a few sort of tell-all scandal-type books had come out, and they were sort of the opposite of the Mary Lutien's book, in which everything is terrible about Krishnamurti. I've never read any of those books, but I get the impression that they present a rather negative portrait of the man, and probably in reaction to how positive Mary Lutien's book is. And so Roland Vernon tries to steer the middle ground with that. And I think he does a good job. It's very well researched. You can look at the bibliography. He looks like he's read everything there is to read about Krishnamurti, including the scandal books, and maybe he's talked to, it's hard to know if he's talked to people who actually knew him, but it's really well researched, and that's what I appreciated about it, because it goes into mostly the most interesting part of Krishnamurti's life, takes up, I think, more than half of the book, which is his early years when he was being groomed to be this world teacher, and some revelations in here which I don't remember being in Lutien's book, Mary Lutien's book, were that Leadbeater, the guy who found Krishnamurti on the beach, was kind of notorious for being very interested in adolescent boys. So, and it was quite a scandal at the time, because he was always cavorting with adolescent boys, and he obviously had a thing for the teenage boys or boys in their 20s. But this author says there's really no evidence that Leadbeater's interest in Krishnamurti was anything other than what he said it was. He wasn't interested in Krishnamurti as a romantic conquest. He really did sincerely believe Krishnamurti was to be the vehicle of the world teacher, but the fact that he was so interested in young boys, and that Krishnamurti was found when he was, like, I don't know, 15 or something like that, it kind of casts a, you know what it casts on it. It kind of makes the whole thing look a little suspicious, but Roland's done his research and doesn't think that Leadbeater's interest in Krishnamurti was all that suspicious. But I didn't even know that was part of the story until I read this book. The other thing that this book does a good job of handling is the other thing that's very scandalous about Krishnamurti is his long relationship with this woman named Rosalind Rajagopal. And Rosalind Rajagopal was the wife of a guy who's usually only introduced as D. Rajagopal. I had to look this up on the internet. His actual real name is Rajagopalacharya Desikacharya, and he's usually called D. Rajagopal. And Krishnamurti had a long-term romantic relationship with D. Rajagopal's wife, Rosalind. And including Rosalind terminated two pregnancies that were Krishnamurti's, and had a miscarriage of another one, so Krishnamurti got her pregnant at least 3 times, and all of them were ended, 2 of them deliberately so, which it's not a good look. But if you just hear that much of the story, you're kind of missing out. What this book reveals is, let me see if I can find the section. After the birth of their only child, this is the 2 Rajagopals, Radha, in July of 1931, this did little to improve the matters of their deteriorating relationship, which had deteriorated before then. Indeed, on first seeing the baby, Rajagopal announced to his wife that having now completed the business of producing a child, they might justifiably cease to have sexual relations. He appears to have grown less enamored of Rosalind and was perhaps also haunted by theosophical puritanism with regard to physical indulgence, so they were very into celibacy. and stuff like that. But he refused to consider a formal separation out of respect for Annie Besant, who was another person in the orbit of the Krishnamurti. She was sort of the main. She became sort of the successor of Madame Blavatsky, and she was very into this whole project of the world teacher and all that. And so, and also this is the 1930s, so getting a divorce was much more scandalous than it was. Eventually, D. Rajagopal moved to India, and Rosalind stayed in Ojai, California, which happened to be where Krishnamurti spent most of his time. And so they struck up a romance. So the idea of him having, it's not great that he had an affair with somebody who was married, but it seems like the marriage was basically just on paper by the time that they got that Krishnamurti and Rosalind got together. The other thing that's not so good is Krishnamurti kept the whole affair with Rosalind hidden, and it really didn't come out in a big way until after he died, which another thing that's not a good look. Apparently they didn't want the scandal, and I think by the 1950s Rosalind and he were no longer involved. So this is taking place in the 40s and maybe the early 50s. It wasn't yeah, they didn't want to tarnish the whole world teacher thing, even though Krishnamurti wasn't calling himself the world teacher by then. So another not a good look, but also, just kind of a human thing that people do, and it doesn't seem, to me personally, it doesn't seem all that horrible. The terminated pregnancies are a bit eyebrow raising for me that he would have done this, but there you go. Take it for what you want. The other stuff he says about Krishnamurti, the author Roland Vernon, is that Krishnamurti had his flaws and his quirks. He was apparently a very fussy guy. He was very interested in nice cars, but actually he ended up only owning one, as opposed to like Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who owned a fleet of Rolls Royces. Apparently Krishnamurti owned a single Mercedes-Benz. So he didn't indulge in flashy, showy consumerism like some spiritual teachers have done. He didn't, other than Rosalind, he didn't seem to be very interested in the women who were constantly throwing themselves at him even from an early age. So he wasn't a philanderer like some spiritual teachers. As it goes with scandals that surround spiritual teachers, the ones that surround Jiddu Krishnamurti are pretty mild. That's Roland's take on it, and I think I agree with him there. The other big controversy that surrounds him is that he was very against turning himself into a cult of personality or having a religion founded in his name. But he kind of sort of did. There is still to this day the Krishnamurti Foundation. They have a place up in Ojai. I haven't been there. I'd like to go and visit it. And what goes on with these Krishnamurti folks? I actually did visit one of their places one time. They had meetings at this place called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore, which is a Buddhist bookstore, very lamented, a great bookstore in Los Angeles. And they had a weekly Krishnamurti Society meeting, and I only went to one. This place was in walking distance of the first place I lived in L.A., but I only went once because I was kind of disappointed with what they did there. Here's what Roland says about these Krishnamurti meetings, and this is basically what I encountered when I went there. He says, a devotional tendency is also apparent in the reverential ambience that characterizes gatherings of Krishnamurti enthusiasts nowadays, especially on the occasions when images of the teacher are brought to life in video presentations, or if his voice is relayed through speakers at hushed group assemblies. At such gatherings, the participants bestow upon themselves and others the mantle of pious sobriety to the point where a critical opinion of the teacher is regarded as unconstructive, if not blasphemous. Yeah, and there's certain language, there's certain words you're supposed to avoid, like guru, discipline, and method, and stuff like that. And he could have been describing the meeting I went to, because that's exactly how I felt about it, and I never went back again. They played a video of Krishnamurti, which was the most interesting part, because I think by that time I hadn't seen, because YouTube hadn't been invented yet. I think it was just on the horizon. And I'd never seen him. I'd read a lot of his books, but I'd never actually heard his voice or seen what he looked like when he talked. So that was interesting. But yeah, the rest of it was just like the guy described. One of the other things that I found very interesting in the book, it occurs in the final chapter called The Empty Throne, which kind of covers the period after Krishnamurti's death up until the year 2000 when the book was published. And he goes into this long speculation about exactly what Krishnamurti was. Was he actually the avatar of Maitreya? Was he the Buddha for our own age? Was he the second coming of Christ? And so on and so forth. And what he kind of settles on is what I would tend to agree with. And I'll just read you a bit of it. He says, "And yet, if the insights of all mystics is fundamentally the same, if they are tapping the one and only source, albeit at different stages of history and in different sociological contexts, what is the essential difference in terms of divine revelation between an enlightened monk in his obscure monastery and the founder of a great world religion? The answer is perhaps to be found in their corporeal rather than spiritual circumstances, the socio-political world in which they live, their personal charisma, zealousness, originality, drive, fitness, and daring, and so on and so forth." So yeah, I don't really think Krishnamurti was uniquely enlightened and was the world teacher. He makes a distinction between the world teacher and a world teacher, which, by the way, if you ever go try to teach English in Japan, explaining the difference between those two articles, Japanese does not have articles at all, so it's really hard. But you, I hope, are English speakers and understand the distinction. So if he's one of the world teachers, then that's one thing. If he's the world teacher, that's something different. And I don't think he was the world teacher. He was one of the world's teachers, and he was good. The other problem with Krishnamurti is that he was so against using any kind of method at all. So he didn't even recommend meditation of any kind to his people. He talked a lot about meditation, but he never described what meditation was. I mean, it's all in vague sort of poetic ways, but he never says, like Dogen does, sit on a cushion and cross your legs and breathe this way. And he doesn't go into even that. And I feel like Zen Buddhism is actually much better because it offers a method, but it also understands the same thing that Krishnamurti understood, which is that there's no sort of one-size-fits-all method that works for everybody, and that methods themselves can become a trap. So recognizing this, they also recommend a method. So it's taking the contradictions, and Krishnamurti doesn't seem to have gone, that length and gone to see that contradictions are not necessarily a bad thing. So yeah, I would rate this overall a real good book. The other thing he kind of goes into is the relationship between Krishnamurti and his most famous disciple, David Bohm, who David Bohm is one of the people who developed the technology that became the atomic bomb. Very smart physicist who was probably also conflicted in his role in the atomic bomb. But he became a close disciple of Krishnamurti, and they came up with a bunch of books together and some videos you can watch of their dialogues with each other. And apparently Krishnamurti had tremendous hope that David Bohm was going to manifest the insight that he was trying to get somebody to manifest, and Krishnamurti died without ever feeling that anybody had manifest the insight he was looking for. The other person who's mentioned in the book, who's often not mentioned in books on Jiddu Krishnamurti, is the other Krishnamurti, which is U.G. Krishnamurti. And Mr. Vernon gives some space to U.G.'s criticisms of Krishnamurti, because U.G. felt that he had the same sort of awakening as J. Krishnamurti is, by the way, a given name. It's not a family name, so they weren't related to each other. but he seems to have. They put the family name at the beginning and the birth name at the end in India, just like they do in Japan. So so they weren't related, but U.G. Krishnamurti was close to Jiddu Krishnamurti, but also separated from him and became very critical of him later on. So that is given some space too, which is really nice to see somebody giving space to that. So overall, a really good book. If you want a book about Jiddu Krishnamurti, if you're interested in that sort of thing, I highly recommend this. And that's my little book review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to contribute to me being able to buy books instead of get them from friends, I buy plenty of books, but I do need contributions because it's the main way I make a living. But you don't have to contribute if you don't want to. But if you want to, the place where you can find the links is on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. But again, you don't got to contribute if you don't want to. All right, that's it for me. We'll see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye.
Hello there, Ziggy. Hi. You moved into this room while I was talking in there. Was I bothering you with all my talking? Yeah, I don't know. That was kind of funny. I was doing the video and then he walked away and went into another room. All right, Ziggy. I'm going to go into another room to edit this so you can go to sleep. Okay, bye-bye.